Quick question, is there a clicker? No? Okay, that's okay. Hello everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Am I okay to walk around? Or will that, you can hear me in a small room, right?
You can use if you want to.
Great, I might do that. I'll pick it up if I need to. So thank you first of all for the invitation. This is not just my first time here in Aveiro, but it's my first time in Portugal. So what a delight it is to be here. And I was actually very relieved that my Spanish helped me understand your slides. So the pronunciation is still a bit tricky for me, the listening, but the reading is, I think I got about 80% of that. So that was a relief. I hope that you'll be able to understand me okay, because I am a strange mixture of Irish and Canadian, which means I speak very quickly and sometimes with a strange accent. So I'll try not to go too fast. But the good news is that this presentation is very image full. So it's a lot of images that I'm going to go through in quite rapid succession, and then I will slow down after about half an hour and I will talk more about pedagogy. Just to check, I have an hour and 15? Roughly. Okay.
1 hour.
Great, 1 hour. Okay. And just to do a minor correction, I don't think I'm one of 3 chairs in the UK. I wish I were. But I'm one of 3 chairs in digital education that the University of Manchester has hired in the last couple of years, really as a way to make it clear, I suppose, that the strategy of the university is to really put digital education on the map in the way that it hasn't always been. I think my position is quite unique in that I'm a chair in a teaching and scholarship role as opposed to a research role. So even though I conduct research myself, it is practice-based research, pedagogy-based research. So in that sense, it's a little bit distinct from research positions. So that's what makes the position quite unusual. And I'm really on a mission, I suppose, to spread the word about digital education as far afield as I can. So I'm really, really delighted to be here. So without going on further, here I go. When I started talking about AI in education, the first time I gave a talk on generative AI and ChatGPT was back in January, just a month or two after ChatGPT 3.5 was released. And at that point, I was very clear to talk about the fact that I thought it was an opportunity, because I saw a lot of panic happening around me and a lot of quite quick reactions to want to shut it down and shut it out. So I was quite quick, as someone who's been working with digital technologies, emerging technologies, digital education for 23 years or so, to see that actually I think we could take this new and emerging technology and use it for good. Now, it's taken 9-10 months or so, but I think it's nice to see that a lot of institutions are gradually turning around. This institution is a wonderful exception to the norm in that you've had this program for years now. You're in your 4th year of pedagogical innovation, which is really quite amazing to see. So you're very lucky. So I hope you will take advantage of all the wonderful things that Sandra told you are at your disposal. But not everybody has the same expertise in their university to draw upon. So it was really my mission, I suppose, to start talking about generative AI, but put it in the context of digital education as a field. And to really make the point that while generative AI is new in the sense that it's new to us as educators, first of all, AI is not new, it's several decades old, and digital education is not new either. So the wonderful thing is that we actually have quite a lot of practice and pedagogy that we can draw upon and that we can use as bases and as models and as foundations from which to design learning with, for, and using generative AI. So that's why I very optimistically decided to call this presentation Embedding AI, because I think we're now, almost a year after the release of ChatGPT 3.5, we are now at a point where we are talking about embedding. We're not just talking about shock anymore, we're talking about how to use it. So I've divided this talk into 2 halves. Essentially, one is about the innovation that we've seen happen, which it can be very overwhelming. It's happening so quickly, literally on a daily basis there are changes, but also integration, how we can then integrate it into higher education. And as Sandra has already alluded to, there are lots of wonderful ways that are already happening at this university, and hopefully I can add a few more ideas and suggestions to round that out. That was a very long prelude, sorry. I'm quite verbose. It's an Irish thing, I think. We talk a lot. So I say here innovation, and we often hear this phrase that, you know, sometimes it's a bit of a cliche, and I don't know if it was really said by the person who it describes to, but people often say that enough innovation happens in a day that is more like a week, and other times it's a month's worth in a day. So as I see it, we have about a decade of innovation happening in the last year or so by normal standards. As I said, the pace is really quite rapid. And what I've noticed, and what I've been reflecting on in the last month or two in particular, as I've seen how academia has been reacting, is that there is an incredible gap between what has happened in industry and what is happening in education as a whole. And what I find really interesting is the curves that we use to look at the hype cycle on the one hand in industry and the grief cycle for coping with loss on the other hand are actually quite similar. Now, I'm not trying to make fun. I'm an academic and I'm in this industry, so I feel the pain and I understand the shock. But I thought that this was really interesting, so I thought I would start just by showing you these two graphs, just to kind of make the point that I think that while on the one hand, while industry is riding high on this wave of innovation, and some say hype, overhype, who knows? There's a lot of AI gurus out there, that's for sure. There's also been a real adjustment period, I think, for academia, and a real worry about losing something, a real kind of sense of an existential moment for academia. And I think a lot of that has come from narratives like this. So stage one, we saw stage one, and this is why I started talking about this in January. I started seeing the news headlines in December. And these were some of the headlines that I grabbed in December and early January that were referring to the emergence of generative AI and the launch of GPT 3.5. And as you can see, people are basically collectively freaking out about GPT. And they're wondering, is this the end of academia? Is this the end of assessment? Is this the end of integrity? Is this the end of education as a sector? Is it all over? So before I go to the next slide, I will just remind you that if you've been in digital education for as long as I have, you will remember that when the MOOCs came on the scene around 2005 to 2008, we had very similar conversations. And there were very similar headlines back around 2007-8 about the end of the brick and mortar institution and that online education was going to destroy traditional education as we knew it, and it was going to replace the university. And strangely, 15 years later, here we all are, still here, we still have jobs, the university still exists. So this is just to make the point that sometimes these shocks, they hit us, we take a little while to adjust. But life goes on. We adapt, we integrate, we embed. So that's what we're here to do. Stage two, though, was a little bit ugly, I thought. Stage two, and again, this was quite early in the phase, was what I liken in the grief cycle to the anger and bargaining phase, where we didn't quite want to accept that we were there yet, and we were really quite angry about what was happening to our disciplines, to the way we assess, to the way we teach, and frankly, for some people, to their sense of authority as the owner of the knowledge. What did it mean if generative AI was now able to provide knowledge to students equal to our own, potentially even more, better than our own, or even worse, wrong, that students would just take as truth because of those hallucinations? So we had the emergence quite quickly of several attempts to break the machine, as I put it. Now this is a pretty crude comparison, and I know that, and as someone with a PhD in history, I recognize that some historians might object to my comparing academia's response to the Luddites in the early 1800s in the UK, but it was a reaction to a new machine that was threatening the way their industry worked, and essentially these early detectors were an attempt to break the machine. So I thought it was quite apt. A little crude, but worked. But innovation being what it is, AI snapped right back. And if you look at the right hand of that slide, this is just one example of an AI tool. This one is called Conch. And the tagline, that it's a revolving tagline, but one of the taglines that comes up says something like, AI, detect proof your essay in seconds. So the promise was for students, no matter what essay or work that they uploaded to Conch, the machine would make it detector proof. So while some people were innovating and trying to make better and better detectors, the AI industry was coming back and making better and better machines. So we had this ridiculous kind of cat and mouse game for months until finally, stage 3. Depression for some, not for all. I was quite glad when these headlines came out. By June, July, by summer, we had finally research, evidence-based proof, research papers that showed us, without a doubt, that detectors not just don't work, but they identify students who have not cheated as cheating, and they also overwhelmingly discriminate against students whose first language is not English. So for me, as someone at a university where we have a high proportion of international students, and where I'm here in Portugal, and presumably you have students who have to learn to work in English and other languages, this is a real concern for me. So I was really delighted when universities then started to take down the detectors, and a university in the States sent out a fairly high-profile news link saying that they were removing their detector from Turnitin because it wasn't trustworthy. So for me, that was the end of stage 3. That was the end of, maybe not depression, but in a way it was a sign that, okay, we really need to just move on. Okay, so here's where we are now. I'm going to recap this year for you very quickly, so just hold tight. We're going to go through a lot of images, and then I'm going to slow down again, I promise. This is what I'm going to show you. Basically, what happened, some of the highlights over the last year in terms of innovation. As I said, it starts in late November. November 30th is the release of ChatGPT 3.5. 3.5, right? Not the first iteration, just the one that made headlines for us and made academia start to pay attention, because this was text generation. So an instant affront to those of us who work in text-heavy disciplines, like my own school. December, as I said, early testing, early adopters, detectors, etc. Panic erupted in January when everybody returned from their Christmas holidays and realized something had happened in November, but they had forgotten because they were off with their families having a nice time. Then they came back to school in January and they thought, oh my God, the world this is it. The sky has fallen. And strangely enough, innovation didn't stop there. So very quickly we started to see other players emerge on the scene. So OpenAI's is GPT 3.5. Then we have Microsoft Bing, we have Google Bard, we have Perplexity, we have Claude, we have all kinds of other bots, chat bots, that started to emerge over the next few months. And then, just as we were adjusting, GPT-4 came on the scene. So I'm going to go on to the next slides now, but I'm going to go through the rest of those as I talk through it. But that's a little bit of a heads up of where we are going. So GPT-4, this is released March 14th, I believe, mid-March anyway, of this year gone by. And I think, to be honest with you, this is when academics who were following it really realized this detector game is not going to work, and we really have to start looking ahead. And the reason for that is that GPT-4 is far superior to GPT 3.5 in terms of what it can do. First of all, it came with plugins, which essentially means you are plugged into an app store with literally thousands of other tools that you can attach to your GPT-4 that will allow you to use the generative AI, the chatbot, to interrogate and to interact with those tools. So things like chat with my PDF, Scholar AI, creating videos, etc. So all of these plugins, and there are literally thousands of them, are available in the ChatGPT 4 shop store, like an app store, and you can enable them in GPT-4 so that it can interact with your chatbot. Another of the 3 important innovations that came with this iteration was data analysis. At this time, it was called Code Interpreter. They have since renamed it Data Analysis because that's what it actually does. Don't know why they called it Code Interpreter. It sounded a bit too specialist for a lot of people, but really that's what it's for. It's analyzing data. And personalization, which means you could have your own custom prompts and you could save them. So you didn't have to write a long, detailed prompt every time. You could save it. So the reason this is so important, well, first of all, it's important in a negative way. It's important because I'm guessing that, let me just see, show of hands, how many of you use GPT 3.5 or have used it? Okay, hands up, how many of you have used or have a subscription to GPT-4? Exactly, right. So this is a real issue. Now, I have a subscription clearly to GPT-4, but I pay for it out of my own pocket. So we are looking now at an issue already about digital divides, on campus and off campus. we did a little bit of a tally of what it costs the average student to be able to pay for the various AI resources that they would need. GPT-4, a couple of the research tools, some others, there was a list of 3 or 4 of them at a conference I went to back in September. The research was done by GISC, the UK non-profit that works in AI and digital education. And they estimated that it would cost about £80 a month in subscriptions for a student. So what was that, 90, 100 euro? Oh, it's the pound, maybe 20 euro now. Just joking. For the average student to be able to use all the generative AI tools that they needed. So just a heads up, first of all, institutional leaders, that is an important moment for us to realize that the digital divide is real. And as the year went on, this divide is going to become more exaggerated. Up to the last week or two, where it frankly I think has become really dramatic and potentially something we need to look at urgently. So the next phase, as I said, more bots arriving on the scene. This is just to give you a little bit of a reminder that it's not just OpenAI. Okay, it's not just OpenAI, in which Microsoft invested 10 billion or something to basically own and conduct and drive and fund their research. But it's also Google, that's been working on the scenes, of course, behind the scenes for ages. But Google kept a pretty low profile for a little while. But then they released Bard. But there's also other chatbots, other platforms that are really useful. And these two are probably 2 of my favorites. Perplexity, because it was one of the first to link to the web. So live, real web citations, follow-up questions, and really much more of a kind of a researcher inquiry-friendly model. They, in the last couple of weeks, have also now released 2 new chatbots. So I urge you to go and check out Perplexity. That's one I would really strongly recommend. Again, like all of them, they have a free model and then they have a paid model. So some of it's paid. I only use the free one for everything but OpenAI, just for research. Claude is made by a company called Anthropic, which has been in the news a lot lately because it's gotten a huge amount of funding in the last 2 months or so. It was, again, kind of under the radar for a while, but now because of its capabilities, they released Claude 2 a couple of months ago. People are starting to pay a lot more attention and realize that Claude is probably going to be very important for academia in particular. So these 2 for academics are very useful. Claude, because it has a really large context window. And what that means is you can't just type 1 sentence or a paragraph as a prompt. Claude made the news because their context window was 120,000 tokens. Now, in plain language, that means the equivalent to the novel The Great Gatsby. So you could now put an entire book into Claude, and then you could have your chatbot talk to the book, or you could ask questions about the book. They have since upgraded, so it's even better. So with these 2 now, we are starting to see capabilities that are really useful for academics, for teachers, for researchers, for students, because they can interact with texts, they have live web connection, and they are really something just beyond a toy, a gimmick. Not that it was ever just that, but again, there was a lot of dismissal in the early days. By summer, this is from Ethan Mollick's blog. If you're not following Ethan Mollick yet, I urge you to follow him. He has a fabulous blog on Substack. It's called One Useful Thing. That's the link down there. And I'll share these slides after, so you'll have all the links at the bottom, so don't worry about writing it down now. This is a summary of everything that Gen AI could do by the summer of 2023. Okay, write content, make images, make videos, use it as a brainstorm tool, write and run code. And not just write and run code, correct code, check code, update code. Computer science is one of the first disciplines to be disrupted by Gen AI. And the reason for that is their programmers, instead of going to Stack Overflow, where they used to go to check their code and talk about what they were doing, they started coming to ChatGPT. And stocks in Stack Overflow plummeted. Since then, Stack Overflow has now integrated AI. So they have also joined the game. As we are seeing in a whole load of companies, from YouTube to Getty Images to Stack Overflow to all kinds of platforms, media tools, where at first they resisted, they are now starting to integrate AI and realize that they have to work with AI. So this is where we were by summer. And then you think you get a break. No, you don't get a break. We're just catching our breath, and this is where it really starts to take off. And I thought it was really, really interesting that in the summer there were a lot of news headlines saying, use of ChatGPT has dropped. It was clearly just a fad. All of those industry ed tech people just making a big deal about nothing. We've seen that the numbers have dropped. And somebody said, hold on a minute, it's summer holidays. The students are off. That's why they're not using it. They'll be back. And boy, did they come back. And boy, did this industry come back with a vengeance. Since September, we have seen a radical improvement and expansion in capabilities of generative AI. So before I talk about GPT's rapid improvement, let me just do a little detour to synthetic media, to images, to video, to website generation using GPT. Google Bard was already multimodal months ago. And what that means is you can put an image in and it will talk to you about the image. That photo on the top left is one I took when I was out for a walk in a forest in Ireland this summer, literally. And there was a lovely little picture of a fairy door on a tree. And I thought, God, that's interesting. I wonder why they've done that. So I took a photograph and I uploaded it to Google Bard. And I just said, tell me about this photograph. And it gave me this lovely paragraph back of fairy stories and Irish mythology and the symbolism and the door as a symbol of entering another world. And wow, that's quite impressive. And then I followed up and I said, okay, tell me where it was taken. And it made a mistake. It gave me the wrong part of the country. It didn't identify where I was. It said I was in Kerry in the southwest of Ireland. I was actually in the middle, very close to my parents' house where I was visiting. But just to say, it was doing something pretty impressive even back then with images, with multimodal. And that is something that has now skyrocketed in terms of capabilities in the last fortnight. So I'll talk about that nearer to the end. So by, again, the summer, we're looking at multimodal capabilities. We also see Google Bard start to integrate something called extensions, which is the same as OpenAI's plugins. Essentially, it means you add an extension. I'm sure many of you already use extensions in your Google or your Gmail or whatever. But you can add in extensions so that basically now Bard can talk to everything. So that's all, some people love this. Some people think, oh my God, I do not want generative AI tools having access to everything. My Google Docs, my email, my photos. But the option is there if you want it. So we are now starting to see, through the plugins, through the extensions, integration. So augmentation and integration happening simultaneously. And then what really blew people's minds, I think, in September was OpenAI announced that GPT can now see, hear, and speak. So not only can it read images, and they put this lovely demo up there of this bicycle. I'm not going to play the video, but you can find it on the OpenAI website. Where they said, they put this up and they said, basically, help me with my bike. Help me fix the seat on my bike. And they uploaded the image, and basically what happens is, the chatbot comes back and says, here's how you lower your bike seat. Now, I don't have it on the slide, but the tester came back and said, okay, that's a great start, but now how do I actually do that? So they took a photograph of a box of tools that they use to fix their bike. They uploaded the image and they say, which tool should I use? And the chatbot came back and said, you should use this Allen key. Right? Pretty impressive. So we're starting to now be able to interrogate images and use these images to actually get live feedback. I saw some hilarious examples online of people posting photographs of very complicated parking rules about when you get a ticket. On Monday to Saturday from 2 to 4, and on Wednesday for half an hour between 3:30, and you can't park here unless you have a wheelchair spot, and then you can park here on Monday night, etc. So the person took a photo of the parking sign and said, can I park here right now? And the chatbot came back and said, yes, you can, for 2 hours. So again, we're starting to see some really, really interesting functionality. But we also saw a lot of fear over the summer, and it was because of things like this. So we're switching now from an era of digital media to synthetic media. In fact, I think I'm going to have to change my job title, because I am a professor in digital education. And really what we're entering is post-digital era. This is where we are now. We're looking at post-digital in terms of media, and we're looking at synthetic media, and by that I mean media that is literally remaking the world. It is making things up. It is not just editing images like this Adobe one in the center, where you can see how generative fill works. But the one that made the big headlines was the Pope, of course, the Pope and the Puffy. That was back in March or April. The Pope did not actually buy and wear a Balenciaga puffy, strangely, right? But it really hit the headlines and it got people's attention, right? Van Gogh's Starry Night with a New York skyline. These are the things that really hit the news and caught people's attention. But what was actually happening was these companies were starting to show you how you could change images with things like generative fill. So that woman there in the center, she could have a snowy background, she could have a city background, she could be in a classroom, she could be out in the field. You can create any kind of background you want. And this is months ago now. This has come on a long way since then. So you start to see the use of generative fill, you start to see generative media, and you start to see things like AI avatars being created for presentations. So companies like DID, one of the leaders in this space, along with Runway, those are probably the two most important companies to look at when you're looking at AI avatars, chatbots for media. They started to show us how we could use avatars in presentations. And again, my ears pricked up because I thought, that's interesting. What's that going to mean for education and those educational videos? If now you only have to write a script and you have to decide what your avatar will look like, and you can create a video that will present your work. And lo and behold, we actually also then started to get this in other languages. So very shortly thereafter, we see synthetic people. Now I say synthetic people, what I mean is that we now have voice cloning. So the tool can record, can copy, can get your voice. You have to, of course, give permission. 11 Labs is the one that I look at a lot for this. 11 Labs there on the left with David Attenborough. I posted a video of him talking in English, and then you could switch to German, switch to French, switch to Spanish, switch to Portuguese, switch to Arabic, switch to whatever language you want that they supported. So think about that in terms of international education as a starting point, right? A video that you have that you can literally do simultaneous translation into other languages. That is stupendous in terms of breaking down physical barriers, linguistic barriers for our students. There's some creepy ones up here as well, which I left up just because they amuse me. But I'm not suggesting we use them. So for example, if you really want to go off on a strange tangent, you can visit Twitch TV and you can watch 24 hours, I kid you not, a non-stop debate between AI Donald Trump and AI Biden. You won't last long, I promise. It's fun for about a minute and then it becomes a little bit soul-destroying. It's also very profane, I warn you. Okay, it comes with a little bit of a restricted warning. And then if you feel really kind of disgusting about that, you can go over to AI Jesus on Twitch TV. And AI Jesus will give you advice based on whatever sins you have committed. And those sins might involve your virtual girlfriend, Karen, AI. And we laugh, but these virtual companions are one of the fastest growing segments right now. Virtual companions, and now in the last week or two, character AI is getting a huge amount of funding. Because first of all, I don't know how it is in Portugal, but in the UK, we have an epidemic of social anxiety in our students. We have problems with loneliness. We have real issues with students who are nervous about coming to class, who are lonely, who don't know how to interact. Some of it's from the pandemic, some of it's just there, and it's part of what this generation is dealing with. You know, so really, really interesting that, yeah, there's some creepy examples, but there's also some very, I think, potentially useful, productive ways to use these tools.
Hi there. Welcome to this talk on generative AI and education. If you're a teacher, you're going to find this super interesting. Are you ready to jump in? Give me a show of hands.
I couldn't resist. She spooks me every time I hear her. Every time I go through the slides and she starts speaking. Now, it's very artificial looking and sounding, but it literally took me 7 seconds to do that with a pre-existing avatar, you know? So that's the kind of thing you might or could want to do if you want to do it. At the same time, we have the emergence of a whole other array of really interesting Gen AI tools, which I put in the category then of friends and tutors and buddies. So Karen AI is one slightly, you know, interesting version, but these are productive, really, really, I think, educationally interesting tools. So one you're probably hearing quite a lot about is Khan Academy's Khanmigo AI tutor, which I always say is my marketing favorite. Because I think in terms of a name for a product, Camigo, of course, is a wonderful thing. For people who don't speak Spanish, you have to explain it to them, or Portuguese. But for those of us who obviously get the joke, it's wonderful, right? So it's this idea that you have this tutor with you all the time, everywhere, for whatever you might need advice and input and feedback for. So we start to see the potential for personalized, adaptive, responsive learning with that tool. And I'm going to come back to that one in a few minutes. We also have some other ones, and it's worth knowing that these are not actually startups from nowhere. So the Khan Academy has been around for decades, one of the leaders in digital education, we know that. They are the heroes of video teaching and learning. Pi, marketed as your personal AI, very interesting. They are the brainchild of, or owned by LinkedIn founders, I believe. So LinkedIn is linked to Pi, and the idea with this one is that you can talk about things that are on your mind. It's more about kind of a touchy-feely, emotional, let loose, unload your problems to me. And then there's Poe on the bottom right, and I'm going to show you a demo of Poe later. Poe is owned by Quora. Quora is the crowdsourcing platform that many of you will be familiar with. If you put a query into Google search, you'll often come up to a URL to Quora, where you can go and get some answers and you can decide if you like them or not. And of course, the one that if you have teenagers, you'll probably know this lovely bright yellow one, which is Snapchat. And Snapchat was one of the first ones, the first tools, or apps I should say, to pin AI to the home screen. And very interestingly, when they did that, when Snapchat put their AI buddy as the top of the home screen that the student or the person using it opens up, AI buddy comes first. Now, AI buddy has gotten in some trouble in the last few months as well, because these are all emerging technologies. And there have been some strange episodes of misbehaving with Snapchat AI buddy, and there's also interestingly been pushback from users who said, we don't want an AI buddy on our Snapchat. That's an invasion of our privacy. So just a heads up that students are very aware of the ethical issues and the risks involved in this as well. We have to, of course, outline them and make them obvious, but just so they are aware. They are those digital natives, they are using these tools and they understand, I think, a lot of the risks, sometimes before we do. Then things start to get interesting. So I mentioned character AI a couple of minutes ago. Character AI is seeing a lot of investment right now. And again, this started more as an entertainment idea, but you can see how it has educational applications, where students can talk to any historical figure that they want. Socrates, Plato, who knows, anyone you want, you can choose, or a lowly history teacher, if you like, right? So you can choose whoever you want to talk to and have a conversation. There is a warning saying it's all made up. But again, these things are improving over time. So we can be skeptical and we can raise our eyebrows now, but I think the truth is we're starting to see the emergence of something very important. Circle chat is one I really like. I was following the Spanish elections a couple of months ago, and I was wondering about what was going on with right and left-wing politics in Spain, giving Spanish history. And I suppose giving Portuguese history as well. So this was an interesting one for me, right? So I was there, I was in Spain at the time, and I thought, okay, I'm going to see how would I talk to a student, or how would I ask a student to think about what's happening in the Spanish elections now, given the history and the context of the country. And very interesting, and that's the only prompt I gave it. And it gave me all of these different characters, so Gomez, Fernandez, Lopez, etc., and they all gave a different perspective on what was happening. So you have this virtual AI chatbot kind of group discussion session happening, where the students are exposed to different perspectives on a given topic. And as I said, I give very little prompting for this, okay? Can I just give a check for my time? How much time do I have?
Well, ideally 15 minutes more.
Okay. I'm going to fast forward. No, I can, maybe 20.
Fine.
Okay, we'll speed up a little bit. This is less relevant for you, but also very relevant for you. Just be aware, I'm sure you know, Enterprise GPT has already hit the business world. You've, I'm sure, heard about Microsoft Copilot. Do you use Microsoft at this university? Do you use Teams? Okay, so do we at ours. This is happening whether you choose it or not. So integration into all of the Microsoft suite of tools is happening. It was launched in September and it's starting to be rolled out everywhere. So whether you choose it or not, just like if you use Gmail, whether you choose it or not, when you open up your email and you start to write an email, it will prompt you, do you want help with that? Just like if you go onto LinkedIn, it'll say, do you want me to help you write a post, etc. Right? So this integration is happening across the board. But for me, what's really important now, especially in the last couple of weeks, and this is why I'm never able to reuse my presentations, because everything changes so quickly, is that in the last month, it has, I think, shifted really dramatically. And that is with the expansion capabilities of GPT-4. So what they have announced now in the last month or so is GPT Vision, which is a much more sophisticated multimodal model where those images I showed you that you could upload and look at and interact with, it can do some really sophisticated analysis of those images. I'm going to show you a case study in a second. They also introduced Turbo, which now has a context window even bigger than that one by Anthropic's Claude that I showed you that could accommodate the Great Gatsby. The new GPT Turbo can take even more. This is really interesting, I think, for us as academics in terms of the documents that you can upload or the knowledge you can link to and how you might want to use it. And last but not least, if you have been sleeping under a rock for the last week or so, you might not have noticed this, but if you've been online at all, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're in any online communities, you will have heard about GPTs. Probably the worst name for a product I've ever seen in my life. I don't know why they called it GPTs, because it's very confusing. We already have GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and now we have GPTs. What GPTs are is basically, as they are describing them, proto-agents. They're not agents at all, the way they work. But what they are is much more advanced chatbots. So let me show you. Before I go to it, I'll show you what agents are. This is coming soon. So GPTs are a step in this direction. So several months ago, there was a lot of talk about AI agents and what they would do to the category, to generative AI. In particular, Agent GPT, there's another one, Baby GPT, there's all kinds. But one that has gotten a lot of attention very recently now is Embedding. Again, you can tell when something's heating up if you pay attention to what's happening with investors, which I do as well. I watch all sides of this conversation. Embedding just got a significant funding round, went through a significant funding round. And as I say, they are building AI systems that can reason. Okay. But really what an AI agent does is you don't anymore have to go up, do a prompt. You don't have to enter a prompt. You don't have to type in instructions, which is the same with GPTs, and I'll explain that in a minute. Instead, you say, I want to create a car that is going to work for people with disabilities of certain types, that will go at certain speeds, etc. Maybe not even that much detail. And you just give the end results that you want, and the agent will take your command, and it will then break it down into sections of tasks. It will decide the task. It will assign the tasks. It will open up the various tools that it needs, code interpreter, data analysis, multimodal, turbo, whatever. It decides what it needs to use, and then it fulfills your command. So now for me, this is really interesting. First of all, because I'm fast forwarding in my head and I'm thinking, what is that going to do to assessment in higher education? We're all talking about authentic assessment now, learning as process, assessing the stages as ways to beat GPT. What do we do when we get to the point where agents do everything for us and there are no stages that we have to interact with? I'll just leave that with you for a nightmare scenario later, but I think that's coming. That's me predicting the future. I don't know it, but I feel like that's going to be happening quite soon, and I think that will disrupt education quite dramatically in the next year or so. So that's the big tech picture. I'm going to go to pedagogy, I promise. And just so you know, these are the things they're talking about. Teachers have been worried about cheating, text generation. We're starting to talk about images and how to use AI for research. There's a lot, obviously, in medicine and health, all those obvious scientific fields. But in other areas that are less used to dealing with AI, we're starting to pay attention. But this is what's happening in the tech conversation. We are hearing that basically we are shifting to a new type of operating system. And we're seeing a bit of it. We're seeing generative search, from copilots to generative search. We're seeing those capabilities go through the roof, which is heading us towards agents. We're seeing partnerships between big tech and startups across the board. Every startup now that's in the news has investment or a partnership with Amazon, with Google, with Microsoft. They're all kind of taking them under their wing the way that OpenAI did with Microsoft. Microsoft did with OpenAI. So those partnerships are kind of showing us what's happening as well. And of course, they need that investment. On the side, I haven't even had time to go into this today, but there's an awful lot of talk about safety, risk, regulation. You'll all know there's an EU AI Act. You'll all know there was an AI Safety Summit last week in the UK. You'll all know that the US President issued an executive order, etc. Those are all happening in the background. I could talk about them in another talk, but I won't. Suffice it to say, I'm leaving it to those experts to work that side of it out. And I'm looking at implementation and how it affects me. But what I think is really interesting to watch, and again, this feels fluffy, and it feels maybe to some people irrelevant to higher education. We're over here in the ivory tower. It's not. So just like when you walk around your campus and you see your students on their phones, they're all looking at their phones, and then they come and they sit in the classroom. They are living blended lives already. They are digital natives. They are interacting with both worlds, virtual and physical. They have friends in both worlds. So what I'm seeing happening on the hardware and devices space to me is very interesting, because they're now talking about wearable AI. Apple is talking about it, and there's rumors, Apple's not saying anything yet, but there's rumors about an AI iPhone coming out. Samsung has just announced its own generative AI model for its Galaxy phone. Humane, a few days ago, it was November, literally they started taking orders, tomorrow, November 16th. Humane, a company founded by some former OpenAI people, have just released this wearable AI pin. Love it or hate it, I urge you to go online and have a look. And there's also a pendant where you can literally have AI record your whole day and rewind through it and then tell you what your actions are, etc. So I highlight that because to me, actually, this is kind of the sneaky stuff that we might not always pay attention to as teachers. But if these devices become the norm, and if our students have AI on their phones, the conversation has changed. It has already changed, truthfully. Of course it's changed. But AI is embedded, right? So we've seen this. This is what we're in. We're in this sixth wave of innovation that started really about 2015, 16, and we're feeling the rise over the side of the edge of that slide, right? And there's, as I said, there's a massive gap still between industry and education in terms of the way that we're talking about it. Time issued their top 100 AI kind of stars. I think there were 3 academics on that list, and really only one woman that I noticed, Emily Bender, who's someone very influential and important if you want to look her, if you don't know her already. She's got a very good article on Gen AI as a stochastic parrot, if you've heard that phrase. Suleiman, a big name as well, related to inflection AI, a very important book. And then you've got Popanici's book, which is the scariest book I've ever read on AI. And he basically likens what's happening with AI to what happened with the Nazis. He does a lot of comparisons between what happened in Nazi Germany and control and surveillance and things like that. There are some quite stark comparisons and a quite challenging narrative in a lot of his book, but it's well worth a read. And then there's Gary Marcus, who has been talking about the problems with AI for years, but he's one of the people who now the US government has been talking to about risk and safety. So the reason I highlight that is because all of those conversations are happening, but what I see though when I watch the big picture is that I know that where big tech goes, ed tech follows. Because we keep seeing it over and over and over again. And I'll give you some examples. This is the startup formula that was big news about a year and a half ago, before GPT 3.5. But then it became a really big thing once GPT 3.5 was released. Jasper AI, a company that is in trouble now, was a superstar in the Gen AI space because they offered something that I call the wrapper formula, which is you've got the LLM base, you've got the GPT, and then you've got essentially a wrapper, a template around it for the product you might want to create. They made it user-friendly, is what it means. They made it user-friendly. Let me write your marketing for free, and then some templates that you could choose from in terms of your output. Now that's for PR communications. Now look at this. This is higher ed. Resource generators are big news right now. So resource generators are being really, I think, quite aggressively pushed at teachers and educators, not so much in higher education, but definitely in the K-12, primary, secondary, because of the problem that, at least in the UK, I don't know about Portugal, but the problem with workload. That teachers don't have time for all the lesson planning. So every single company that you will see marketing their content and resource generator, it's all about We can save you time. Time. I'm so tired of hearing that phrase. We'll save you time. Because the problem with it is that they are offering to save you time, but the humans, in my mind, is being designed out of it with that product. And I'm not really a fan of that, is the truth. I'm going to skip this next one because this is just an example of what's happening in the assessment space, because I don't have a ton of time myself. There's also e-learning generation platforms. Totally overpromising right now, but they will get better. They will get better. Right now, they say they will generate instant online courses. What they actually generate are flip cards. But they're getting better, right? All of these are getting better. And those bots that I showed you earlier are now being integrated into learning management systems. Now, I don't know which one you use, but there are two examples that I'm watching. One is Canvas, owned by Instructure. One is Blackboard. Canvas is taking the student experience approach, and they're looking at how to personalize student experience by integrating the Kamigo tutor into their LMS, which I think is a good idea. I like this idea. I think this has a lot of potential. Blackboard is taking, I would say, probably more the content resource generator role, but they are marketing and looking at educators, teachers, instructors who are short on time. So their design assistant helps you get your course up fast. So two very, very different approaches, both from LMS companies, both operating in higher education. So this brings me to the quote I always love to give, which is from Tony Bates, a leader in digital education for decades. He has recently retired, but he is still speaking out quite a bit, and he has a fabulous blog that you should also follow. He's based in Canada, and you can see it for yourself. He wrote this 3 years ago, 2020, and he asked who should control AI in education. Should it be educators, students, computer scientists, or large corporations? And essentially what he is saying is, we need to get into this. We need to be part of the conversation. So that is why I'm out here talking about it, because I think that if we don't all look together about how to embed AI, how to learn to use AI in our practice, in our teaching, in our research, then the direction it goes is not our own. And why would we want that, right? So maybe 5 more minutes, quickly. I always overestimate what I can do in an hour. I'm sorry. This could be in a whole other hour, so I'm going to flip through some highlights instead, okay? And perhaps we can talk another time. So we're at integration now. So we go back to that curve, the grief curve. I think we're now at acceptance, right? We definitely are here at this university. You're very lucky. Not everybody is in this mental space. But the reason I know it's true is because of this. UNESCO has already issued guidance. And quite frankly, it's quite conservative. But I think if it's UNESCO guidance, then we all know it's pretty safe, right? And their advice is, in short, co-design. Co-design so that we can have critical competencies designed into our educational models that are both human, all of these important human competencies, but also those really critical AI competencies. And again, each one of these could be a talk on its own. And there are lots of experts talking about all of those. But I've been looking specifically at these last two, the last little while. This is just another highlight from the document. That's just all in their document. So I'm going to scroll through that, and that's a couple of screenshots where they give some suggestions. And the reason I say it's a bit conservative is that these suggestions are fine, but they're already a bit dated, is the truth. They're a little bit dated. They also say that assessment with Gen AI should focus on things that humans can only do. That's already in question as well. So for example, as I said, assessment that only humans can do? What about agents? Then what do we do? And creativity is a uniquely human attribute. If you follow Ethan Mollick, for example, you'll see that he's been doing studies on innovation and creativity in his students. And there's very strong evidence that, sadly, the majority of students are actually not as creative as AI. AI is shown to elevate the kind of mediocre level of students up a bit, to not make the very creative better. They're already going to be the top. But it's been shown to kind of take the middle force and bring them up a little. So that's a bit of interesting feedback for us. So very quickly, I'm going to skip through, not to scare you, to literally just one slide. And I think this is what Sandra and her colleagues are working on, which is so, so important. And that is that if we are going to embed generative AI into our education models, first of all, we need to work collaboratively because you cannot all be experts on all of this. It's impossible, right? You can be a disciplinary expert, you can be a technology expert, but you can't be an expert in everything. You have to have a team. And your team has to have you, the disciplinary expert, but you also need a learning technologist. You need experts in learning design. You need to be looking at the scholarship of teaching and learning. And you need to be looking at educational development and how you're going to work with these tools. So this is a team process. It is not the professor on their own writing a course anymore, because that's not how the digital world works. Digital courses are always created in teams, always. And we now live in a digital world. And now I'm sure Sandra and her team will be able to talk to you about all of these things, but there are all kinds of learning theories that underpin what I suggest that we do. The final two there are my favorite. Connectivism, which is really looking at students as agents, as nodes in a network of knowledge. And generative learning theory, where students generate their own learning. Now, it's not about generative AI, but they generate their learning through active learning. We'll see it in areas like this. Again, I'm sure Sandra and her team know all about the community of inquiry, but this is, again, about using this framework to design constructivist collaborative learning. ABC Learning Design, a really popular one in the UK, comes from UCL, based on the 6 learning activity types. And design, backwards design, starting with where you want to finish up and designing your course with that in mind. Because really this is where I think we're at. When I say embedding AI, we are now in the era of a new hybrid. And that hybrid is not online or face-to-face learning. That hybrid is human and AI collaborating together. And I have given it a kind of a silly name, I'm sorry, but I thought it was fun. I don't mean to plagiarize generative learning theory, but I've called it generativism. And it's just to think about, right? It's not the final word. This is my thinking, that this is our symbiotic approach to teaching and learning and research with AI. It's based on those learning theories and approaches. It's about generating knowledge and research and understanding in collaboration with AI. I'm going to fast forward through those because that is just an example of how they all work. But that shows you some of the AI with those learning approaches. And this is probably the one that I'm finding gets the most attention. If you reframe the community of inquiry, which is about social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence in your course, and if you reframe that, thinking about generative AI, collaborator AI, analytical AI, facilitator AI, and you start to think about those tools and how you can use them, we start to see how we can design learning using these 3 different kinds of presences with these AI tools. And then we can create learning with generative AI. That could be, I think, really, really impactful. Final minute. I've been doing some experimenting. You can follow me on LinkedIn. It sounds very influencer-ish, but I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about my experiments. So if you'd like to, it's all on there. But I created a couple of chatbots myself to compare how I might work with this presence. Quora is one. This is free. You can just look it up, Mairéad P. Put in some questions, see how it works for you. I'm going to skip this one, and I'm going to show you a prompt. This is an example of what we used to have to do with GPT to get an output, but now, because of these GPTs that were released last week, now essentially we have these personalized bots where your custom prompt is used to train your own personal chatbot. I've called it Digital Professor. That's me, that's my chatbot. And I've uploaded my article on generativism, and I've told it to look at learning design, community of inquiry, learning theories. I've told it to look at all these things just as an experiment to see what it'll do. And this is what we're seeing people do. This is a historian from UC Santa Cruz, who's also created one. There's so many of them. It's called The Historian's Friend. Here's an example of how he's using his chatbot to look at images from the 1930s and analyze them and tell us what they're about. Here's how he's using it for data visualization. Again, an old article said it took him about 1.2 split seconds to generate these graphs. Translation of old texts. Again, and that's literally what he uploaded, that one on the right. He's also done some work on old Catalan medical texts. And he's doing all of this in GPT with the multimodal analysis. So what I'm seeing is it's augmenting our individual capacity. It's not replacing us, it's augmenting what we can do. From the analog model to the digital we've had for the last decade or so, to really now what we're seeing with AI starting to emerge, where we have experts on call, we have personalized learning, we have an AI ecosystem of tools to draw from, we have conversational models where students can interact. It's not didactic, it's interactive, it's conversational, it's back and forth, it's collaborative. Final slide, you're already here. I was so excited to see Sandra's opening because frankly, all of the things you're doing are on my list. These are all the things I think that we need to do to embed AI. Obviously, you need to embrace learning agility. So if you're not using a GPT, go and try one out. Any of them. There's loads of free ones. Access, critical. So I don't want to put anyone in a hot seat, but I think we are nearing the point where university administrations are going to have to look at how we deal with the subscription issue. How are we going to deal with the different levels of capabilities? Because there is a real gap between GPT 3.5 and 4. And those bots I just showed you, you need a subscription to use them and to create them. Networks, you're already creating one. Community of practice, you already have one. Digital pedagogies, they're there to show you all about it. Use them. You know, take the advice on best practices. Flip your classroom around, experiment. Use your face-to-face time to play with some of this in your classroom. Put things online that can be put online. Put them on with a chatbot and let students ask questions there. Use your class time for something else. And reframe assessment. I don't know how you do it here, but at Manchester, some of ours is still very text heavy, very high stakes, 1 or 2 assessments at the end of the term. That's just not feasible anymore. So I will leave it at that. I'm sorry I went over. I'm more than happy to take any questions later, and of course via email, please feel free. And I hope that was helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm a terrible timekeeper.
Thank you, Mairéad. That was very inspiring. Just a quick note, there's also a very nice bridge between how we started 4 years ago and your presentation, because Mike Sharples, that at that time presented his book called Practical Pedagogic, 40 New Ways to Teach and Learn, now created a chatbot with the information of the book, and you can ask the chatbot about the knowledge on the book. So it's a way of connecting the dots between the beginning of our path and where we are right now. So we are very tight in the schedule. We will be having a 10-minute coffee break and then restarting at 11:50, because the Secretary of State has a very tight agenda today with the university. We are demanding a lot of the Secretary of State today. Probably we have to shorten a bit the Q&A questions, but we have a Q&A session with Professor Mairéad, and so in 10 minutes we will be back to this room and starting at 11:50. Thank you.
I'm so sorry about my time. No, it's no problem. I could.